Chapter 1. The Walls He Built. Amy Johnson stood on the curb, staring up at the mansion that could have been pulled from a glossy magazine cover. It wasn't just big. It was intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the morning sun like mirrors refusing to let anyone see inside. The perfect metaphor, she thought. A house determined to reveal nothing. She smoothed her skirt with trembling hands. One job interview. One chance to rebuild her life. One child who needed warmth. She inhaled and pressed the bell. The door swung open with mechanical precision. And there he was. Edward Simmons. Up close, he looked like a portrait painted in grayscale. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, yet colorless. His expression was carved from stone, his posture rigid, as if his body itself refused to relax. "Miss Johnson?" He didn't smile. "Come in." His voice held power, the kind that made people listen before they even realized they were afraid. She followed him into a living room too neat to be lived in. The furniture was beautiful, but looked untouched. Bookshelf arranged by height and color. Fireplace spotless, a single framed photograph on the mantel. A woman holding a toddler, both smiling, full of life this home no longer remembered. Amy's heart pinched. Edward noticed her gaze linger and instantly stepped between her and the photo like a shield. "We'll keep this brief," he said. "I'm a busy man." He stood while she sat, an interrogation posture disguised as an interview. "You will care for my daughter, Sophie. Your responsibilities include meals, school preparations, and monitoring her tutoring sessions." His tone was a contract read aloud, emotionless. "There are rules you must follow." Rules. Of course there were. No personal questions. I don't have time to entertain them. Do not ask about my wife. That topic is off limits. And do not, under any circumstances, attempt to fill any emotional voids. His voice faltered slightly on that last word, as if it tasted uncomfortable coming out. Amy nodded carefully. "I only want to help." He studied her long enough to make the air feel heavier. His eyes were a deep storm gray, focused and guarded, searching for something he hoped not to find. Then came a soft patter of footsteps. 1, 2, 3. A small face peeked around the corner. Sophie. She looked about 5, with messy brown curls and eyes too sad for someone so young. She froze when she saw Amy. Her tiny hands fisted the fabric of her father's trousers, like she might disappear if she let go. "Come here, sweetheart," Edward coaxed gently, his voice softening just for her. A special tone, reserved only for this tiny human. Sophie stepped closer, half hidden behind his leg. Her eyes darted to Amy like a frightened deer. "Hi, Sophie," Amy said, lowering herself to the child's height. She introduced herself softly, every movement slow and gentle. "I like to draw." "Do you?" Sophie said nothing. But she didn't run away either. That was enough for Amy. Edward crossed his arms, watching like a judge waiting for a verdict. Amy felt his gaze on her, evaluating her every word and breath. She reached into her tote and pulled out a little sketch pad. A bunny with floppy ears decorated the first page. She tilted it towards Sophie. "His name is Mr. Marshmallow." Sophie's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile, gone too fast to catch. Edward saw it. And for the first time, his stern expression flickered. Hope. A brief, dangerous hope. He quickly smothered it. Amy felt the shift in him. The retreat. Something in this home had clearly taught him that hope only led to heartbreak. When Sophie became restless, Amy helped her sit on the rug to try a new drawing. Sophie glanced back at her father often, as if needing permission to exist. Edward cleared his throat and straightened his cuffs. "You start tomorrow. It was abrupt. Final. Amy blinked. Thank you. I appreciate it. He said nothing. He only knelt in front of Sophie to put on her tiny shoes. But Sophie kicked her feet, frustrated by the strap that wouldn't cooperate. May I help? Amy offered gently. Edward hesitated again. The man likely hated needing help, but he shifted aside. Amy crouched. Warmth, tiny and innocent, radiated from Sophie's foot as she guided the strap through the buckle. When she rose, her hand brushed against Edward's. The touch was light, barely there, but the temperature seemed to spike. His fingers tensed. His breath hitched. Just once, their eyes met, noticing, recognizing, wanting something neither of them dared name. Amy pulled her hand back, a flush blooming in her cheeks. The air tightened between them, pulsing with something forbidden and fragile. Edward stood too quickly, buttoning his jacket like armor. That won't happen again, he muttered. She wasn't sure if he meant the touch or the feeling. Amy stepped toward the door, casting one last look around the immaculate, echoing home. This family was drowning in silence, and she couldn't help but wonder if she had just been hired to save a child, or a father who'd forgotten how to breathe. Behind her, Edward watched her leave, fists clenched, jaw tight, silently cursing the warmth that lingered on his skin. No, he told himself. Not again. Never again. He locked the need away where he kept all his other wounds. But Amy's presence had already done something dangerous. It made him feel the first tiny crack in the walls he built. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Ice. Amy arrived early the next morning, nervous energy fluttering in her chest like trapped wings. She found the kitchen already occupied. Sophie slumped at the table, arms crossed, tiny chin set in stubborn refusal. A bowl of cereal sat untouched before her, milk turning the flakes soggy. Edward stood nearby, in a suit that probably cost more than Amy's monthly rent, checking his watch with impatience he tried to hide. His tone strained but gentle. Sophie, please. Just a few bites. The child only shook her head harder. Amy smiled inwardly. So this was a normal morning here. Crisp edges and silent battles. I can take over from here, she offered softly. Edward's eyes flicked to her, doubt battling relief. After a long second, he stepped back. Amy pulled up a seat next to Sophie and lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Cereal is no fun. How about we make breakfast instead? Sophie's eyes lifted, curious but cautious. We could make pancakes. Bunnies again, Amy said with a playful wink. Did your mommy make pancakes with you? The question slipped out instinctively, with only good intentions behind it. Sophie blinked, then nodded. The smallest nod, barely there. Amy smiled warmly. Then maybe we can do it together. You can be my chef. What do you think? It was the first time Sophie looked hopeful. Amy stood and rummaged through the cabinets, searching for flour and eggs, while Sophie followed, tiny feet padding across the tile. It felt normal, domestic, alive. Edward lingered by the doorway. But when Amy turned, stool in hand, to help Sophie reach the counter, she saw his posture had gone stiff, jaw tight, eyes darker. She had touched a memory she wasn't supposed to. Still, he said nothing and watched as Sophie giggled while stirring batter, accidentally splashing flour onto Amy's shirt. The room filled with soft laughter. Something the walls seemed startled to hear again. Edward stared. He didn't move. He barely breathed. Just for a moment. He looked like a man rediscovering light. After Sophie had eaten 2 full bunny-shaped pancakes, and happily skipped off to get ready for school, the fragile piece shattered. Edward cornered Amy at the sink while she washed dishes. "You're here to provide care, not to bring up painful topics." Amy dried her hands, spine straightening. "I brought up her mother because Sophie needs to feel safe talking about her. Grief doesn't disappear because you refuse to say her name." His gaze sharpened painfully. "Don't tell me how to raise my daughter. And don't tell me to pretend her mother never existed," she replied firmly. "She is already in everything Sophie does. She shouldn't be punished for remembering." A muscle ticked in his cheek, anger warring with hurt he could not reveal. He took a step closer, towering over her, trying to intimidate her into silence. But Amy didn't flinch. Edward's voice dropped lower, dangerous. "Stay in your lane, Miss Johnson." Amy looked straight into the eyes of the man who had everything except the courage to face his own heartache. "My lane," she said softly, "is wherever Sophie needs me to be." For a moment, Edward looked lost, like the words struck something deep and raw. He turned sharply and walked out before she saw anything more. But she had already seen enough. The house was quiet by nightfall. Too quiet. Amy found herself wandering after cleaning up, drawn by the black grand piano tucked into the corner of the living room like an old secret. Dust clung to its keys. She hesitated, but her fingers longed to break the silence. She sat, a soft melody unfurled. Delicate, comforting, something like a lullaby touching a wound. Footsteps approached. Edward stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Surprise, anger, grief all tangled. He opened his mouth, perhaps to ask her to stop, but then he noticed the small form curled asleep on his chest. Sophie had wandered down earlier, asking for her father wordlessly, climbing into his lap. Now, her breathing was steady, peaceful. The first peaceful sleep he had seen in months. Edward exhaled slowly, as if his bones were tired of holding him upright. Amy's playing softened, her gaze finding his across the room. For several long seconds, neither looked away. Something passed between them, an understanding, a truce, a recognition they hadn't asked for. He gathered Sophie in his arms carefully and turned to carry her upstairs, but not before giving Amy one last look. It wasn't gratitude exactly, but it wasn't coldness anymore. It was the first sign of thaw. When she was finally alone again, Amy lifted a trembling hand to her chest, trying to steady the heartbeat that wasn't supposed to be involved. Because despite all his walls, Edward Simmons had felt something. And feelings were the one thing he feared more than anything in the world. Chapter 3. Fighting the familiar. The screams shattered the night. Amy sat up instantly in the guest room, heart pounding, recognizing the sound of pure fear before her mind had even caught up. She rushed into the hallway, bare feet hitting the cold floor, and found Sophie crying at the top of the stairs, tiny fingers clutching her stuffed bunny like a lifeline. "Oh, sweetheart." Amy scooped her up before she could shake another breathless sob. Sophie trembled against her, face buried into Amy's shoulder. "It's okay. You're okay now," Amy whispered, smoothing curls away from the child's damp cheeks. "Bad dreams can't follow you when someone's holding you." She rocked her gently, the way a mother might. Sophie's breathing slowed. Her crying softened into small whimpers. A voice, deep, sharp, sliced through the quiet. "Sophie?" Edward stood halfway up the staircase. Tie gone, shirt slightly wrinkled. A man jolted from sleep and still caught in a nightmare of his own. His eyes widened at the sight before him. His daughter safe, in someone else's arms. His step faltered. For months, He had been the only person Sophie let close enough to soothe her. Now, that small child clung to Amy like she was solid ground. Edward swallowed hard, as if something in his chest tightened too quickly to handle. Amy looked up. Their eyes caught. No words spoken, but volumes exchanged. She carefully moved toward him. Sophie reached a sleepy hand toward her father, transferring her weight slowly into his arms. Edward cradled her automatically, protective and soft. She woke from a nightmare, Amy murmured. She just needed someone there. Edward nodded once, the smallest acknowledgement. But he held Sophie differently when he turned, almost as if afraid she'd slip from him too. Amy watched them disappear into the dim hallway. Her heart cracked open a little wider. Morning came with the scent of coffee and awkward tension. Sophie wrapped her arms around Amy's leg, refusing to be put down as Amy carried her to the living room. But as she stepped forward, her sock slipped on the marble floor. Ah! She would have fallen. Sophie too. But Edward's arms were suddenly around her, firm hands gripping her waist. Her body pressed into his chest solid against her own. The world froze. Edward's breath hitched in surprise. Amy's pulse hammered wildly against the closeness she wasn't prepared for. Sophie clung to her neck, but Amy couldn't move, even if she wanted to. Edward realized it too late. The warmth of her hips beneath his hands, the shock of desire he hadn't felt in years. He let go like he'd been burned. "This cannot happen," he snapped, stepping back as if distance would erase the moment. Amy steadied herself, cheeks flushed. "It was an accident. It can't happen," he repeated. But his voice cracked on the second word. Not anger. Fear. Fear of wanting. Fear of losing again. Sophie looked between them with wide eyes, sensing something she couldn't name. Amy turned away first, because if she kept looking at him, he might see too much. By late afternoon, the atmosphere was cooled with silence, but still charged with electricity neither could dismiss. Sophie tugged at Amy's sleeve as she cut strawberries for a snack. "When is Daddy home?" Sophie asked. The question tugged directly at Amy's heart, because she already knew. Even when he was here, he wasn't really here. "He'll be home for dinner," she said gently. "But maybe he should always be home for dinner, don't you think?" She gave Sophie a tiny smile. Family dinners help people feel more connected. When Edward arrived that evening, loosening his tie with a sigh, he paused at the sight of them at the counter. Sophie helping slice strawberries with a plastic knife, Amy guiding her. Home. Alive. Warm. It terrified him. But Amy didn't back away this time. "I was thinking," she began, voice steady. Sophie would benefit from a routine that reminds her she's not alone. A weekly family dinner, all three of us together. Phones away, no meetings, just you and her. Edward's first instinct, refusal. His second, defensiveness. But his daughter looked up, hope shining in her eyes like he hadn't seen in so long. His heart cracked, right down the center. "Mondays," he said finally. "I can be home by 6. Amy's smile was soft and victorious. For Sophie, he added quickly, too quickly. Amy nodded. Of course, but they both knew the truth. It wasn't just for Sophie. Edward Simmons was beginning to fight the familiar. Connection, desire, warmth, and losing terribly. Each moment with Amy made the ice inside him melt a little faster. He just didn't know how to handle the thaw. Chapter 4. Learning How to Live Again. Monday arrived with the weight of expectations. The dining table, usually pristine and untouched, now held dishes Amy had spent the afternoon preparing. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, a small bowl of strawberries cut clumsily into heart shapes by Sophie. Soft lighting warmed the room, chasing away the usual chill. Edward arrived home precisely at 6. Jacket off, sleeves rolled. He looked more like a man coming home to a life, and less like a CEO retreating to isolation. Sophie ran to him, arms flung wide. He lifted her, and for the first time, in a very long time, he smiled. Amy noticed. Dinner began with small talk, mostly between Amy and Sophie, while Edward watched, trying to remember how to be part of a conversation that wasn't transactional. But laughter kept finding him anyway. Sophie's messy storytelling, Amy's gentle teasing, and every time he laughed, Amy's heart startled in her chest. She pulled out her phone. "Let's take a picture." Edward instinctively frowned. "I don't..." "Just one," she said softly. "For Sophie." That was what convinced him. Amy leaned in next to Sophie, and Edward angled closer so his daughter fit between them. Sophie giggled, grabbing Amy's hand. The camera clicked. Later, after Sophie had bounded off to choose a bedtime story, Amy showed Edward the photo. His breath caught. He was smiling, not politely, not for show, but truly laughing. Eyes bright, arm wrapped protectively around his daughter. He barely recognized himself. "I haven't seen that man in a long time," he murmured, voice unsteady. Amy looked at him. Really looked. He never left. He just needed a reason to come back. His gaze lifted to hers, held it, and something flickered, dangerously warm. The next evening, the house was quieter. Edward returned late, tie loose, stress clinging to him like a shadow. Amy was reading with Sophie, or trying to, but Sophie's eyes were red and glossy with frustration. "She missed the school recital today," Amy said quietly when Edward entered. "You promised you'd be there." His face paled. "I had an urgent meeting. Sophie's small voice broke through, trembling. "Everyone else had a mommy or daddy there. You weren't." Her lip quivered, and tears spilled fast. "Do you care more about work than me?" The knife of guilt hit him so hard, he staggered. "Sophie," he breathed, kneeling to wipe her tears, but she turned away, choosing Amy's arms instead. The rejection stole the air from his lungs. Amy held Sophie close, rubbing gentle circles on her back. When Sophie finally drifted off to sleep, Amy laid her in bed and quietly stepped into the hallway, where Edward stood, head low, the image of a man losing the one thing that mattered. "You're doing your best," she said softly. "No," he snapped, then caught himself. His voice softened into something barely audible. "I'm failing." Amy hesitated, then pushed through the fear of overstepping. "Edward, she needs you more than your company does." His jaw clenched. Old fear rose, the fear of trying again only to break again. He looked ready to retreat behind those walls she hated. So she took a step closer. "She needs memories with you. Ones she can hold on to when she's scared or lonely. She doesn't need perfection. She needs presence." He closed his eyes. Her words weren't knives. They were truth, and truth hurt more. Much later, Amy headed downstairs to gather her things. She found Edward in the living room staring at that photo from dinner, the moment that had cracked him open. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "I want to do something special for her, but I don't know what she'd want. I barely know what she likes anymore." The admission was carved from regret. Amy stepped beside him, careful but unwavering. "Let me help." What did she talk about before the recital? She mentioned cotton candy, he said, brow furrowing as if he'd forgotten how to think like a parent. And rides? Something about a roller coaster that looked like a dragon? Amy smiled. The amusement park opened last month. Every kid in town is obsessed with it. Edward stared at the photo again. At Sophie's smile, he made a quiet decision. Then we'll go. You, me, and Sophie. Amy blinked, taken off guard by the we. For her, he added quickly, as if she'd believe otherwise. But the warmth in his voice betrayed him. For Sophie? Yes, but also because for the first time in a long time, spending a day laughing with them sounded like hope. Edward Simmons was learning how to live again, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. Chapter 5. A day that changes everything. Sophie couldn't contain her excitement. Her tiny sneakers bounced against the pavement as she practically dragged both adults toward the amusement park entrance. Edward had dressed down in jeans and a soft gray sweater, a look that made him seem more approachable, less untouchable. Amy tried not to stare. Too much. You look. She paused, searching for a safe word. Different. In a good way. Edward glanced sideways, the corner of his mouth twitching. I suppose billionaires are allowed a day off now and then. No, she whispered. Fathers are. His eyes softened, and he quickly looked away before she could see too much. Inside, the park was alive with colorful lights and the sweet smell of cotton candy. Sophie's delighted squeals drew smiles from strangers, and Amy found herself falling into the moment with them, forgetting rules, forgetting everything except how good it felt to just be happy. Edward lifted Sophie onto his shoulders for a better view. The sight hit Amy square in the chest. This tall, powerful man laughing as his daughter tugged his hair like reins. He looked like a real dad again. She snapped a photo before she could think. When he saw her holding the phone, he tensed. But then he saw the image. Sophie's glowing joy, his own unguarded grin. His breath hitched. He hadn't seen himself like this since before. Amy lowered the phone slowly. This is you, she said softly. The part you thought was gone. Something in his expression fractured, a mix of gratitude and fear. Fear that if he let himself feel this, he could lose everything all over again. Hours later, the sky shifted, dark clouds rolling in without warning. A loud crack of thunder jolted Sophie, and she clutched both their hands. We should find shelter, Edward said. They rushed beneath a nearby canopy, barely avoiding the downpour. But the rain blew sideways, droplets chilling Amy's arms. Without hesitating, Edward shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, his hands brushing her arms, warm against her skin. She inhaled sharply. He noticed. His hand lingered a moment too long, their bodies too close. The storm outside felt tame compared to the one rising inside them. Amy looked up, eyes big, uncertain, but wanting. Edward froze, breath trembling as he scanned her face, her lips. He leaned in, just enough that she felt his breath against her mouth. Warm, tempting, terrifying. Her heart hammered. His fingers flexed at her waist. Every instinct screamed yes. Daddy! Sophie's voice sliced the moment apart. They jolted back like teenagers caught somewhere they shouldn't be. Edward's jaw tightened, the door to his heart slamming closed again. It was a second chance he almost took. And it scared him more than losing everything. Later, with the rain cleared and the sun making a shy return, Amy asked a park attendant to take a photo of the three of them. They posed, Sophie in Edward's arms, Amy beside them, close enough to feel the heat of his body. The attendant grinned. Beautiful family. Say cheese. It should have been harmless. Just another memory. But as the shutter clicked, a second camera clicked too, from the distance. A long lens. A lurking figure. Edward felt it. Eyes on him, on them. He snapped his head around, just as the photographer vanished into the crowd. His gut dropped. By evening, the headlines hit. Widowed CEO's secret romance with a nanny. New woman enters billionaire's life. Is this Sophie's new mom? Accompanying photos. Edward's hand on Amy's waist. Amy leaning into him. Sophie smiling like they were a family. His fear became gasoline. His heart became a match. This was a mistake, he said, voice cold as steel. Amy flinched. Edward, we can't give anyone the wrong idea. Sophie doesn't need another disruption. Wrong idea. Disruption. Mistake. Amy swallowed hard, throat burning. It wasn't that he didn't feel anything. It was that he felt too much. Sophie tugged at his pant leg, sensing the shift, her voice small. Daddy, what's wrong? Edward forced a breath, plastered on a smile for his daughter. A mask he'd perfected. Nothing, sweetheart. Let's go home. Sophie reached for Amy's hand instinctively. Amy squeezed back but kept her eyes fixed on the ground, afraid that if she looked at Edward, he'd see the hurt he caused. The day that had felt like a beginning now felt like the start of heartbreak. Because what they'd shared, laughter, closeness, warmth, wasn't nothing. It was exactly what terrified him, and running away was the only thing he still knew how to do. Chapter 6. Running from what he wants. The headlines were still fresh when the distance began. Edward moved through the days like a man determined to rebuild every wall Amy had dismantled. He stopped allowing casual touches. No more fleeting hand at her back. No more soft glances when she wasn't looking. Even his voice changed, clipped, polite, painfully formal. Miss Johnson replaced Amy. Work schedule replaced family dinner. A cold shadow replaced warmth. Amy tried to tell herself she understood. He was scared. He had a reputation to protect, a daughter to keep safe. But logic didn't soften the sting. Every time he stepped away, instead of closer, it felt like a betrayal she had never agreed to risk. Sophie noticed the change first. Children always do. Once bright mornings turned quiet again, Sophie clung harder to Amy, like she feared the ground beneath her feet was shifting. And it was. One afternoon, Amy passed the hallway and overheard two house staff whispering as they organized laundry. Poor thing. I heard she might be fired. Of course. He can't date the help. You know how this ends. They went silent when they saw her standing there. But the damage was already done. Amy's stomach dropped. Sophie, just around the corner, had heard too. Big teary eyes, trembling lip. Fear no little girl should ever understand so well. Are you leaving? Sophie cried, voice breaking in half. Please don't leave me too. Amy knelt immediately, arms wrapping Sophie close. I'm here, she whispered. I'm right here. But Sophie wasn't listening. She was shaking. Edward appeared, drawn by the sound of his daughter's distress. His heart cracked when he saw the panic in her eyes. An old wound ripped open. You can't leave. Sophie sobbed at him instead, pounding tiny fists against his chest. I can't lose her too. Edward froze. Her words struck deeper than any accusation. His daughter wasn't afraid of losing a nanny. She was afraid of losing another piece of family. It's okay. He tried soothing, but Sophie pushed away, burying herself in Amy's arms again. Amy carried Sophie upstairs to calm her. Edward remained standing there, fists clenched, breathing like the world was falling apart, because maybe it was. He had been so focused on protecting himself. He hadn't noticed his daughter breaking. Night arrived heavy with guilt. Amy, weary and heartsick, began silently folding clothes into her suitcase. She couldn't stay where she wasn't wanted, where she was seen as a problem, not a presence. Her dreams of helping this family were becoming mistakes. Edward found her in the guest room mid-pack, the suitcase gaping open like a silent goodbye. "What are you doing?" His voice scraped like gravel. "What does it look like?" Amy didn't turn around. "You want distance. I'm giving it to you." Edward stepped forward, panic sharp in his voice now. "Amy, you made me believe I mattered here," she said, carefully folding another shirt even while her vision blurred. "But you only wanted me close until it scared you." Edward reached for her, but she flinched away, his fingertips grazing only air. "Don't," she whispered. "Not unless you mean it." Silence. Heavy. Damning. Then he did what he'd avoided for weeks. He let himself feel. Edward grabbed her wrist, but not with force, with desperation. His palm slid up to her cheek, thumb trembling as it brushed away a tear. "You made me feel alive," he said hoarsely. "And I didn't know how to handle it." Amy finally looked up, and what she saw in his eyes destroyed every last defense she had. Fear, regret, longing. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met. A soft, careful kiss at first. But then his hand slipped into her hair. Her fingers curled into his shirt, and the kiss deepened, slow, aching, full of all the words neither of them could speak. A kiss that tasted of second chances and dangerous hope. His forehead rested against hers when they finally pulled apart, both breathless. "I'm choosing," he whispered, voice raw. "I want to choose." But fear flickered again. That last bit of armor refusing to fall. Amy cupped his jaw gently, forcing his eyes to stay on hers. "Then choose us," she breathed. "Not just the idea of us, but us. Sophie, Amy. A real family." Edward didn't answer with words yet, but his grip tightened like he was terrified she'd vanish if he let go. For the first time, he wasn't running from what he wanted. He was running toward it, or trying to learn how. Chapter 7. Choosing love out loud. The boardroom was a battleground. A dozen eyes bore into Edward, judging him not as a father, not as a man, but as a headline. Stacks of newspapers lined the table, each one branding his private life a scandal he never asked for. Widowed CEO replaces wife with nanny. Is love just another business move? He'd spent years letting other people craft his narrative. The powerful billionaire CEO, unattainable, untouchable, a man whose heart had died with his wife. But today, for the first time, he stood not as a businessman, but as a man who finally understood what love could rebuild. "If anyone here believes I should fire Amy Johnson," he said, voice echoing through the tense silence, "they misunderstand what makes this company strong." He paused, letting the shock settle. "We innovate. We take risks. We value humanity. And right now, my daughter and I are learning how to be human again." Whispers rippled around the room, but Edward held steady. "She is not a scandal," he continued. "Jaw firm? She is someone we care about. She is family." An executive scoffed. "Edward, this could ruin your image." "My image," he said sharply, "can recover. My daughter's heart cannot." Silence. Truth had weight, and he had spoken enough of it. He slid a stack of documents toward them. "I'm stepping back, temporarily. The company has enough leaders. My daughter only has one father." He left them stunned, but it didn't matter. What mattered was waiting for him at home. The mansion felt different now. Lights, warm. Curtains open. The walls no longer holding their breath. In the kitchen, Amy's laughter floated like music as she and Sophie attempted to flip pancakes, this time with dragon-shaped molds and far too much powdered sugar. Flour dusted Amy's cheeks like snow. Edward stood in the doorway, just a moment longer to memorize the sight. The life he thought had ended, reclaiming him piece by piece. "Daddy!" Sophie squealed, rushing over. "We're making dragons." He hoisted her up effortlessly, spinning her once as she giggled. Then his eyes met Amy's, and something inside him softened completely, no resistance left. They cooked together, moving around each other in a comfortable dance, shoulders brushing, hands touching for just a second longer than necessary. Each breath shared was another quiet promise. Later, they curled onto the couch, Sophie in the middle, a blanket pulled over all three. A children's movie played, but none of them really watched. Sophie slipped into sleep first, her tiny fingers tangled with Amy's. Edward's hand found Amy's beneath the blanket. He laced their fingers together. No fear this time. Edward looked down at Amy, like she wasn't just saving his daughter. She was saving him too. "You're staying, right?" Sophie mumbled sleepily, without opening her eyes. "I want you to stay forever." Amy's breath hitched, tenderness blooming painfully wide in her chest. "If that's what you want," she whispered. Sophie nodded, already drifting back into dreams. Edward shifted closer, free hand rising to gently tuck a strand of Amy's hair behind her ear. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, slow, reverent, like he was memorizing the shape of his future. "It's what we want," he murmured. Amy looked up, her heart opening like sunlight through clouds. Edward leaned in, pressing the softest kiss to her forehead, a worshipful act full of devotion. Then he brought her hand to his lips, kissing the inside of her wrist. No fear, no hiding, just truth. "You gave us back our life," he said. "Now I want to spend mine giving you the love you deserve." Amy's eyes shimmered, a smile trembling into existence. The home that once echoed with grief now wrapped around them like a warm embrace, laughter waiting to return, mornings waiting to be lived, love waiting to grow even deeper. Sophie curled tighter between them, and Edward draped an arm over both his girls, his family. Not a replacement, not a disruption, a new beginning. Amy rested her head on Edward's shoulder, listening to his heartbeat steady and sure. And together, they breathed out the same quiet truth. They were finally home.